disaster, travesty, extravehicular activity, purple. These are just a few of the words that could describe spaceflight in the year 1964. In this episode of Kerbal Gets Real Redux, we are going to attempt to send missions to both Mars and Venus, strong emphasis on the attempt, as well as performing the world's first rendezvous and EVA, all thanks to the brand new, all singing, all dancing Garrison III launch vehicle, which marks the first time we'll be able to send 2 crew to space at once. Kicking off this episode, we finally get 1,750 researchers into R&D, and that's certainly going to help unlock some very nice tech. Having not finished the geostationary orbit program yet to farm some extra contracts, a new Odyssey is rolled out and the contract is picked up. After that, a quick trip into the astronaut complex to find my next victim. Amanda Wilson, the most courageous and least stupid, is the target for now. We set her to train for proficiency in the Gemini capsule, which will take 540 days before attempting to launch the first rocket of this episode, GO2, on the 18th of January. And I mentioned this was a bit of a disaster in the year of spaceflight, and we are kicking things off wonderfully as I forget to change the orientation of the probe on top of GO2, causing the rocket to try and flip round to right itself. It's uncanny how easy it is, but because most of the rockets survived, we gained a fair bit of money back, and I go into the vehicle assembly building and make sure that I change the control point before cancelling the contract. I will need to pick that up again before launching the next one, but it is one of those contracts that gets more lucrative the longer you leave it, so I really want to be picking that up the day that I launch this. And I will tell you now, I have a bad habit of forgetting to pick up that contract again. But less than a month after the last year launch, we have GO3 on the 16th of February. That Odyssey complex can really churn these out now. With changes to the probe core and avionics on this vessel, things are off to a much better start, and we don't immediately blow up as soon as leaving the launch pad. The second stage then fires up successfully, and I would be very surprised if it weren't to, considering I now have 10,000 data units into the RL-10 engine, a reliability of over 99%. And a short while later, GO2 has successfully made it to low Earth orbit, and that means it's time to plot out our maneuver to make us geostationary. And remember what I was just saying about the RL-10 engine now being incredibly reliable? Well, it would be just my luck for it to fail. Not to worry though, we build these things so quickly, the next one is ready to be launched on the 20th of March. It was, however, at this point that I realised I had forgotten to pick up the contract for this launch. So that means a recovery to the VAB, back to the Space Centre, pick up the contract before attempting to launch this again on the 31st of March. And I did misspeak there, the reliability currently is over 98%. Still a little bit ridiculous that that failed. What am I playing, KSP or XCOM? Well, it's as they say, third time's the charm, right? And hopefully the third launch of a geostationary satellite, something that I really should be able to do quite easily, will be successful. I mean, the first one was on me. That was a design error, but the second one was a test flight failure, and there are going to be plenty of those over the course of this episode. Seriously, I mean it when I say this has been the worst year in this career so far, by quite a way. Even up to where I am now, nothing has trumped this. This is by far the most frustrated I have ever been at RP1, like ever. Even in old series, before I even did YouTube, this year really got me down. I felt really bad after filming this entire year, to the point where I didn't actually open the game again for a couple of months. This is the last lot of footage that I have from November. I took a break from this between November and then January, and that means in the coming episodes we're actually going to be starting to see stuff that I have done over the course of this year, which means there are going to be other changes coming as well. I did update quite a few of the mods. I do have a new UI theme, and it all looks a lot better. Well, finally I was able to get that satellite up to geostationary orbit, and now we turn our attention to Shackleton 5, a new interplanetary mission being launched on the 25th of April, and this time around we are going to Venus. I've already orbited Venus, but I want to go back with the intention of landing on that hellish landscape. That's right, Shackleton 5 is going to hopefully do what Shackleton 4 could not, and become the first mission that successfully lands something on another celestial body that isn't the moon. I should really say celestial body in interplanetary space rather than the Earth-Moon system, because yes, if you didn't catch the last episode, Shackleton 4 unfortunately had a little bit of a communications problem when it landed on the surface of Mars, in that it didn't have any. This is definitely something that I have rectified with this design, and actually the probe on top of Shackleton 5, I think maybe the best design I have ever come up with for a small interplanetary probe. It looks amazing, it's got asymmetry, I love a bit of asymmetry, even though it does make it a little bit harder to balance out where your center of thrust is going through your center of mass, but thankfully I have RCS Build Aid for that, and I made liberal use of that mod whilst I was designing this craft, because I did not want to get to Venus and suddenly find myself spinning out of control. But thankfully the RL-10 on the Pegasus stage is able to fire up successfully. Like I mentioned before, this thing has a reliability of over 98%. It should realistically never fail, bear that in mind. Although I was a little bit concerned due to the fairing mishap that we had in the launch that I completely glossed over. That's right, the payload fairing separated not quite as hard as it should have done and ended up crashing into both the Pegasus stage as well as the top stage of this spacecraft. Luckily, no solar panels broke and the antenna didn't break, and we managed to shake clear of that relatively quickly. Anyway, the Trans-Venus injection stage has now been completed, and unfortunately we are missing Venus by quite a margin. However, this is nothing a small correction burn cannot fix, and one is plotted out to be performed in 48 days using only the upper stage's RCS. This is a feature I really like with Principia. You can tell it to use the active RCS on the spacecraft rather than the engines, because I don't want to use that Juno 6 engine for this burn. It'll be way too powerful, and it only has 3 ignitions, and I really want to be saving every single one of those for when I get to Venus. With Shackleton 5 on its way, it's back to the Space Center, where I pick up the first rendezvous contract before going into the vehicle assembly building to work on Garrison 3. Well, I mean, I've already built Garrison 3, and I'm not going to show you the build time lapse in this episode because I didn't record it. However, I am going to tool it and try and unlock all of the parts that I need for it. Unfortunately, I am some ways off in terms of funding, and it's not until the 18th of June that I can actually afford to build it, nearly 2 months after the last launch with nothing going on at the Space Center. I really think maybe I should probably manage my funding a little bit better. But now with that all done, it's time to build something that Garrison 3 can actually rendezvous with. I could maybe go for an older satellite that I already have up in this save, but I'd rather not do that. I'd rather build something, and then that way at least we get another launch, and we can even launch this thing on top of a Thunderbolt. It's the mid-60s, and I'm still using my 60-ton launch vehicle, and we're going to get another flight of Thunderbolt in the next episode as well, because I've already started editing that video, and I've seen there is yet another one to come. And not only that, I'm fairly sure every time I unlock new scientific experiments, I am going to be launching small probes to orbit Earth, and realistically, I only need a Thunderbolt to do that. It can put a satellite into a polar orbit, and that's really all I need it to do. Low polar orbit, I get all the science done. Anyway, we're wrapping up the build of the Garrison rendezvous test now, and this probe is very capable. Enough solar panels and electric charge to last a decent amount of time, as well as 1,500 meters per second of delta V once it makes it to low Earth orbit. So that does mean that I could do the rendezvous with this craft rather than the Gemini, but I am going to do it the Gemini because, you know, it's a little bit better if I do it that way. I'm not going to do it like real life where they got 2 Gemini to rendezvous with each other, but no, we're going to rendezvous Gemini and the Gemini rendezvous test. That's a lot of rendezvous in a single sentence. The amount of researchers I have on my staffing has drastically increased over the course of this episode, and I find myself now with 2,000. But before launching the first Garrison 3, we have to turn our attention to Shackleton 5, which has made its way to Venus. And unfortunately, I suffered a bit of a smooth brain moment here and didn't record it when it first arrived, which means I have no footage of that Juno engine failing to ignite once we got there, which means that this just became a very expensive Venus flyby. You now might be starting to see why this episode really tested my patience, and I was a little bit upset that I forgot to hit record on OBS. It's definitely an amateur mistake that I've made before, but not for a while, and there is also missing footage for the next episode, but that's because it got corrupted. But I miss a very vitally important moment in the next episode as well that I'm gonna have to figure out how on earth I'm gonna talk about that. But no, now the fact that TESTFLIGHT has failed twice for me and has ruined a very cool Venus lander concept, one that I was going to fly again at the next Venus transfer window, but for the life of me, and I don't know how this happened, I also overwrote the save file for Shackleton 5 with Shackleton 6, which is coming later on in this episode, and that one did not have a lander on it. And once again, I seem to have gone incredibly off tangent and didn't bother to mention anything that just happened in the Space Center. And probably the most critical thing was upgrading the astronaut complex to level 5. Now I can train my crew up in the use of moon landers. We're still some ways off of that yet, although by the time this episode airs, I hopefully should have completed that on a live stream, but I do need to get ready for that, and it is gonna take some time. And because I neglected the Space Center section, well, now I'm cutting into my time to talk about GRT, which is the Garrison rendezvous test. We launched this on the 20th of October 1964, and just like that, we get it to orbit. But now we're getting onto Garrison III. Now you might be wondering, what on earth happened to Garrison II? Because we had Garrison 1, which was Mercury. Well, Garrison 2, we don't talk about Garrison 2. Please don't ask me about Garrison 2. Don't leave a comment asking what happened to Garrison 2. It's just a figment of your imagination. But this will be the first time that we send 2 Kerbals to space at once. And we're not just doing that, this vessel has an incredibly long list of missions that I hope to accomplish by the time that we return Thierry Petit and George Edwards safely back down to the ground. I mean, the way this episode is going, if they get back safely down to the ground, I will be bloody amazed. At least I shouldn't have too much to worry about test flight with this, because all of the engines that I'm using on the Garrison III vehicle have been flown extensively. On the first stage, we have 4 LR89s, and they are my most used engine in this entire series. It's the engine for the first stage of Thunderbolt, the boosters of Odyssey, the first sort of stage for Pinnacle, because that's stage and a half Atlas style. And well, that meant when I fired them up, all 4 were successful, as you saw, and we were able to clear the launch pad very easily. And as you can see, this puts Thierry Petit in a very good mood. Now, 4 LR89s on a rocket this size does mean that the Gs are going to get quite excessive once we get to the end of that burn. It's not something that you really have to pay attention to, but I do like to try for a little bit of added realism to keep my ascents under 3.5 G. I personally, a very long time ago, did go in a G-force simulator at Cape Canaveral, which pushed about 4 Gs. And I can safely say my memories of that was one of the sickest I have ever felt in my life. And this is coming from a type 1 diabetic that has had some issues over the years. Diabetic ketoacidosis is no joke. But anyway, to make a long story short, to overcome the fact that this would be pushing excessive Gs, I shut off 2 of the LR89s halfway through the ascent. I really could have summed that up in about a sentence, but no, that's not my voiceover style. But we are able to get to space, and the Pacl fairing adapter releases the Gemini 3 spacecraft majestically like a duck flying out of a cannon. I don't think I've ever seen a duck flying out of a cannon, but I'm sure that wouldn't be graceful at all. And actually, if you do see something like that, maybe give Animal Services a call. I don't think that's very healthy for either the duck or the cannon. And straight back on topic, the main goal of this mission was to perform a rendezvous with Garrison rendezvous test. So in order to avoid waiting several months in orbit, I raised the orbit of Garrison III to 450 kilometers. That way, the rendezvous probe should hopefully catch up a little faster. And whilst waiting for that vessel to catch up, George Edwards unfortunately was feeling a little bit cramped inside that tiny Gemini capsule, so she thought, what can I do to try and alleviate the stress of being contained within this thing? And the answer was, I'm going to go into space. I'm going to get out of this capsule and I'm going to float around using my RCS EVA pack, much to the horror of everyone at Mission Control. But thankfully, they did see this as a possibility, so they did decide to include EVA jetpacks on this mission. And I mean, well, no, I included it because one of the goals for this mission was to do the first EVA, which is exactly what we have just done. George Edwards has gone from being an X-plane pilot to being the first Kerbal in orbit, now to being the first Kerbal to perform an EVA. How many other milestones can she hit before she has to retire or dies? And if I'm going to be honest, I'd much rather it be the first one, but Kerbal death is always a real possibility. But hopefully that's something that I don't have to deal with for an incredibly long time, because right now we are attempting to rendezvous with the Garrison rendezvous target, and this was quite possibly one of the worst rendezvous that I ever attempted. I was very far away from my initial approach when I first did the burn to get to the Garrison rendezvous target, and it took me quite a few attempts even getting to within 4,000 meters. But you can see I have now actually made it to within 100 meters, which is enough to fulfill the contract. I need to be going less than 0.5 meters per second, and I need to be less than 100 meters away. This was made somewhat difficult by me designing this craft with really bad RCS control, but do not worry, future iterations of the Garrison III vehicle will have that fixed. And we have managed to complete the contract. Just about. We're 42 meters away. It's absolutely fine. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We've done it. We've completed the rendezvous, and we have also stayed in space for a record duration of 2 days. We have got a record crew number of 2 crew. We've done a rendezvous. We've done an EVA. I don't think I went for any altitude records over the course of this mission though, but as I mentioned at the start of this entire mission, I feel like I've said mission a couple times too many there, we had an entire long list of things to do, and we have really fulfilled quite a lot of the things that I wanted to do. Now, this was something that was worrying me quite a bit. The Gemini capsule was heating up to a point where I was getting very concerned, but thankfully it did start cooling down. Now, one thing that would have been smart for this was using descent mode. Descent mode is built into the Gemini capsule, and that basically shifts the center of mass so that the capsule starts pointing upwards slightly, and it makes descents a lot more manageable, as well as not inflicting anywhere near as many Gs on our poor Kerbals inside. George and Thierry were safely brought back down to the surface of Earth, and unfortunately they do not push their retirement dates back anymore, and I think they should have done, and I think the reason for this is because currently, as mentioned in the last episode, Earth is kerbing. And yes, that has caused me quite a lot of problems. Never update something when it says do not update if you are using this, and I did that. By next episode, Earth will be Earth again, but unfortunately the problems that I have caused for myself have stuck. But not to worry, because over the last couple of weeks I've actually managed to fix most of the things that went wrong, so in the end it wasn't all that bad, but I would highly recommend do not do this. Because George's retirement date did not get pushed back any further from that mission, I'm getting dangerously close to her actually retiring, as currently I'm only going to have her until the 9th of June next year. And what I really wanted to do now was finish the astronaut complex so I could start training her up on more advanced capsules. That in the hope that the training would further push back her retirement date. I want to keep her as long as possible. I want her to be the first Kerbal on the moon if I can. Unfortunately, even if I set the astronaut complex at 100% build rate, it's still not going to be done in time, and I can't set it to 100% because I just don't have the funding at the moment. So this is something that I'm really going to have a look at in the next episode, and hope that changing Earth back to Earth will make George a little happier and make her want to stay at my glorious space administration, because clearly it's the place to be right now. I mean, just look at us. We're launching Shackleton 6 to Mars on the 14th of November 1964. What else could you possibly want from a space administration? Yes, we are going back to Mars. This time though, Shackleton 6 doesn't have a lander, as was the case with the last Mars mission, because I have a contract just to orbit Mars, and I thought, I don't really want to design a whole lander again. The last time it didn't go too well. Let's save that for maybe a little bit further in the future. Shackleton 6 is just going to be an orbiter, and hopefully that way it will get me the confidence and reputation that I need to keep my space program funded. The Pinnacle rocket, however, was capable of getting Shackleton 6 to low Earth orbit just fine. We've flown a lot of those Pinnacles now. They are very, very reliable launch vehicles. And with that, the Pegasus stage was separated from the launch vehicle using some tiny separation motors. Now, this is a problem. I have mentioned it before, but if you do not turn the thrust limiter down on those separation motors, Principia, when you are planning a trajectory, will take their thrust into account. And this means your trajectory will be wildly different from what it says it is, especially when you have a stage that uses one RL10, because those 4 separation motors basically double the amount of thrust that Principia thinks I am giving this stage. And this is not inherently obvious that you've not done this, and I think the only way you'd really be able to tell is if you look at the burn time. My burn time for this burn is 183 seconds, 3 minutes. I should have known that the RL10 on this should have needed to have burned for about 5.5, 6 minutes. That's really the only indication that I had that something was a little bit wrong. So I let MechJeb Autopilot do its thing, fire up its engine and complete the burn, and unbeknownst to me at the time, because I hadn't changed the thrust limiter, it only burned about halfway of what it should have done. And this meant that I've not even escaped Earth's sphere of influence yet. I did overbuild this stage though, and the RL10 has multiple ignitions, so now with the thrust limiter changed, I fired up the engine again, and lo and behold, I told you to bear it in mind, the engine fails halfway through the burn. A 98% reliability engine fails twice in a single episode. I was livid. I was so furious. I was, how is this happening? The RL10, it's stupidly reliable for me right now, and it just doesn't work. I've never had a problem with like AJ10s ever in this series. I don't even think I've really used them, but the RL10, I've always found it to be incredibly reliable, but no, it's not. And yeah, that's just why this entire episode has been a complete disaster. We've had 2 attempts at interplanetary missions, and both of them have failed. And to rub salt in the wound, what you just witnessed there was me attempting to launch another geostationary satellite and once again forgetting to pick up the contract. Oh well, that's not the worst thing that could have happened, and I was able to recover it to the VAB, roll it back, pick up the contract, and then move back out and try and launch it again on the 17th of December 1964. We are right at the end of the year now. Historically, Kerbal Gets Real episodes always go completely wrong in December, so what are the odds that the RL10 on this is going to fail again? Let me know. What do you think? I mean, this is the last launch, so you've not got long to leave a comment, or if I'm doing this as a premiere, you've not got long to say in chat. Hello chat, if you are, yeah, if this is a premiere. Hello chat, yes, I'm talking to you. Hello the Space Peacock. Beastie, are you in chat? I don't know. Honestly, I've just gone to the last time I premiered a video on a Friday, and I've just seen the 2 names that spoke the most in the live chat, so if you are actually in, that would be quite something. But at the same time, there's a good chance that you won't be. Anyway, the Odyssey is perfectly capable of getting this geostationary satellite into low Earth orbit, and then further sending sending it onto geostationary orbit. And I'm going to cut out all of the planning for this because we have seen it multiple times over the course of this episode already, and that would just, I'd be reusing content. But the satellite did make its geostationary orbit, and the customer was happy with it, and we transferred it over, and that means I lose everything that I had with this satellite. I don't get to use it for comms or anything like that. It's a little bit of a shame, but we find ourselves at the Space Center, where it's a quick warp ahead to the 1st of January 1965. I have moved the astronaut complex up to 65% now, and it's still not going to be done until the 20th of August 1966. That is quite a way off, and really I think George Edwards' time might be limited. So in order to get over that, and because the Gemini capsule does require engineers for some of its experiments, I go into the astronaut complex and pick up 2 new Kerbals, Cody Phillips and Harold Hughes, an engineer and a scientist, and they are going to get trained up in use of the Gemini capsule immediately, because I'm going to be using that capsule for the foreseeable future, for absolutely everything that I'm going to be doing. But yes, we find ourselves on the 1st of January. This year, expect lots more Gemini flights, as well as another attempt at sending something to land on Venus, considering over the course of this episode, that went disastrously wrong. And I gotta say, I really hope TESTFLIGHT is a little bit kinder to me next time round. A big thanks to Casey, CDR San, Opus, Redstone Wizard, Shadow Dev, Y Mandarin, Chris Morrison, Darth Malachor, Mr. Blue Star, Rail Cowgirl, Ryan Miller, Zenon, and the rest of my patrons and members for their continued support. I have been Karnasa, and I will see you later.